I am Paul Henault for Simsbury Community Media, and today we are interviewing Stephanie Thomas, Secretary of the State for Connecticut. We are going to discuss some important issues regarding voting rights, early voting, and civic engagement. First, let me provide a brief biography of the Secretary of State. Stephanie Thomas has spent her entire career in public service. Prior to her election as Secretary of the State, she served as a state representative for the 143rd District, which includes Norwalk, Wilton, and Westport. As Vice Chair of the Government Administration and Elections Committee, she helped pass a variety of voter-focused bills such as automatic voter registration, advancing early voting, and universal access to absentee ballots. She is committed to protecting voting rights and strengthening civic education in Connecticut. She also had a distinguished 30-year career advising and problem-solving for nonprofit organizations, which, by the way, is the status of Simsbury Community Media. She holds a BA from New York University and an MS in Nonprofit Management from the New School University. Throughout her career, Stephanie has served on many boards, strategic planning committees, and is also an active volunteer in her community. She and her husband reside in Norwalk. We are pleased to welcome Stephanie Thomas, our Secretary of the State. Secretary Thomas, thank you for joining us today. Would you give us a brief overview of what the Secretary of the State does here in Connecticut?
Sure. Thank you, Paul, for having me. I like to say it can't be brief. We do many, many, many things. We are the repository of many records for the state. So if you ever want to know something that happened in 1713, we might just have that record. Okay. We also store all the laws that are passed. So once the governor signs a bill, we become the permanent house for those records. But then many of the things that most people use us for, we control the business registry. So anyone who's starting an organization here in Connecticut, they are filing through our office, and we are making sure that all their I's are dotted, T's are crossed before they start that. And then, of course, most people know secretaries of the state these days because we oversee the administration of elections. And we also do some things with notary publics and apostille and, many types of documents and certificates and regulations. But those are the main functions.
Okay, that's good. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is early voting. Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us a little bit about early voting and how you see that playing out?
Sure. Early voting is great. I think most people know Connecticut became the 47th state in the country to adopt some form of early voting. So it is in-person voting, but it's not at your usual polling place. So every municipality in Connecticut will have at least one early voting location, and you go like you typically would. Once they know you're an eligible voter, you'll be handed a ballot. The only main difference is you'll also get an envelope, and once you vote, you'll put your ballot in an envelope, put it in the receptacle, and then it's stored sealed until Election Day and not opened until then.
Okay. And the days vary by primary or general election, correct?
That's correct. So in a primary, it's 7 days, ending the Sunday before the election, so you count back from the Sunday. And for the general election in November, it'll be 14 days. This always sounds a little confusing, so I tell everyone, don't try to memorize it. Just go to civics101.ct.gov because the hours also change, but it's 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. all days of early voting, except the Tuesday and Thursday right before the election, where it's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So like I said, it gets confusing very quickly. Just use our website as a reference, and then you'll always be...
Yeah, and it is laid out quite clearly in that. I did visit.
It is, yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Very comprehensive.
Yes. So we try to make it plain language and user-friendly, so glad we succeeded.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about absentee ballots as well. Mm-hmm. Why don't you talk about absentee ballots and what we're doing in that regard?
Sure. So a couple of things. Well, absentee ballot law is also very complicated, so I always encourage people to look on our website. If they can't early vote for whatever reason, they can't show up on election day, you can vote by absentee ballot if you meet one of 6 criteria. And I won't get into all of them, but basically it means, sickness, you're out of town, something like that. You can vote by absentee ballot, and all of those laws are also on our website. You can go to that, Civics 101. But this year in Connecticut, in November, there will be a ballot question. And that question is whether or not our Constitution should be amended to allow for what some people call no excuse absentee voting. Sometimes it's called universal access. There are about 29 states that have some form of no excuse absentee voting. And then, of course, 8 states vote entirely by mail. So here in Connecticut, like I said, you have to meet one of those 6 legal reasons to vote by absentee. This ballot question, if people vote yes, if the legislature creates a law, that would mean you can vote by absentee without any excuse. It could be, I don't know, you hurt your foot or something, you just don't want to go out that day. So I'd like to remind people, check their ballot to make sure after they vote for their candidates that they also vote for that ballot question, because sometimes people are so anxious to vote for their candidate.
Sure, they forget.
They may think, they
don't
forget.
The next page.
Exactly. In some towns, it's on the back, etc. So look for the question and just know, in the simplest terms, a yes vote means that the legislature can consider whether or not Connecticut should have no excuse and what that law would look like. A no means you would still have to meet one of the 6 current excuses.
So a little bit beyond just what's on your website, will there be any TV or radio advertising? I know you have a very, very tight budget, but
Paul, our budget is so tight that it is non-existent. We have a lot of changes in Connecticut, in particular early voting. So we did request a special appropriation so that we could educate the public. We did not get it, so we are trying to squeeze literally $1,000 here, $100 there to create materials so that we can try to educate the public. But it's why we also have that Civics 101 site. Everything there is designed so people can download it. So we are constantly in touch with neighborhood groups, town committees, state agencies doing this. Exactly. And we're hopeful that we will get the word out. Many of our media partners also have allowed us to do free PSAs. So we just look for smart partnerships and try to educate the public.
Okay. Well, one of the things that in today's world that we're all very concerned about is the introduction of AI. And how AI is going to impact almost everything that we do. You can't pick up a newspaper or look out on some news feed where you hear about that type of thing. What about the impact on elections and election security? What do you think about that?
I mean, it's a big concern, not just for my office, but for secretaries across the country, for agencies like Homeland Security, etc. I think back to, I believe it was 2020, there was a story here in Connecticut about an overturned truck spilling out ballots. And it was posted on social media, and there was the typical share like, oh my gosh. But we knew it. I wasn't secretary then, but I was running for the legislature, so I was following it. And we knew it was a fake story because ballots hadn't even been printed yet. So, sometimes they must have taken it from a national news story where they have 45 days of early voting, but we didn't even have our ballots printed. So the problem with something like AI, if that same story happened right now today, with AI, we might see hundreds of people posting about it and saying, like, firsthand account, because we know that there are foreign bad actors who this is what they do. They spread disinformation, and then we spread it as misinformation, thinking it's valid. There was just a story in Forbes magazine a couple of weeks ago talking about like a Russia influence, an influencer group that has been linked with Russia. In a 2-day period, they stood up 120 websites. And what they do, they scrape real content and then just put in little spots of disinformation. So we all just have to be a lot more careful about what we consume, what we spread, and we have to know where to go to get the correct information. And that happens to be our website when it comes to elections. Or your town's website. Every town has a registrar of voters, 2 of them, in fact.
We have
and a Republican and a Democrat. And we are asking them to also overshare on the town's website more than they have in the past, just so community members have a fast place where they can look. So they can certainly go to our website, which is myvote.ct.gov, or they can go to their town's website.
Nice. And speaking of the registrars, that's sort of leading into the next question on civic engagement, because one of the things that we all need is volunteers.
Yes.
And the registrars tell me that, it's very difficult to get volunteers for not only election day, but also for like early voting. You mentioned 14 days. You got to have.
We need a lot
there.
for people.
Volunteers.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about civic engagement and how your office is working in that regard.
Yeah. One of the reasons I ran for this office, I felt that, and it's not just a Connecticut problem. I think it's an American problem. In most states, there is no entity responsible for civic literacy. Now, in some places, there are school requirements. In Connecticut, we only have that 1 credit, I believe, in high school. But no one is really tasked with making sure everybody has civic literacy. And I think we are seeing the results of that. When I go out and do speaking engagements, I always give a quiz. And like a very basic question, I say, true or false? Election day is the first Tuesday in November. And 8 out of 10 people say true. And I'm like, no, that's false. And it's the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And that's a basic thing. And it has always been that way. So you would think, like most people, would at least know that. So when I was elected, we very quickly tried to elevate civics. We have the Civics 101 site, because a lot of people said, we go to your website and we can't understand what it says because it was written by lawyers. So this is like plain language information. We started our Civically Engaged Organization, our CEO program, where businesses, organizations, houses of worship, some towns have joined. We have over 200 members so far. And they have taken a pledge to help spread civic literacy, whether it's to their customers, employees, clients, etc. And we send out information every month about what's important coming up that month so that they can share it. It's just so important that we know how to vote, where to vote, but also more than that, how to be a poll worker. Most people think it is a volunteer job, but it's paid in every town in Connecticut. And when I tell college students that, they're like, really? Like all of a sudden, it's a lot more appealing.
Tough, but it is. It's a thing.
It's more than minimum wage in most towns in Connecticut. Some towns pay as much as $22 an hour, which is nothing to sneeze at. So we are trying to get the word out about all types of civic literacy so that people really understand how to have a voice in their government.
Yeah, that's very important. That's very important. I'm
100%.
glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And you just keep...
All with no budget, but I
want to say all with no budget. Because your website really is a good source for information, and more people should go to that.
Yeah.
And maybe as we get closer to election, although there's a primary coming.
There is a primary,
Well,
August 13th. Yeah.
And they can go there and get that information.
Yeah.
So we'll be airing this so that they can see that. So that's great. So as we get near to the end of this interview, are there things that you would like to communicate that maybe we didn't touch on any of those categories?
Yeah.
Or other categories?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say, it does feel like a very scary world, right? There are still, claims of election malfeasance from 2020. We have the very real stories of alleged election malfeasance here in Connecticut from the last municipal election. We have AI. We have, Russia and Iran and misinformation and disinformation. And it feels like everything is not working and horrible. So I would just like to reassure people that our elections here in Connecticut are very safe and secure. And when problems come to our office, I take it deadly seriously to make sure that we address those problems. We file complaints with SEEK, the State Elections Enforcement Commission, often, mainly because I feel that you just have to keep addressing things as they come up, or, you'll never solve them. But everything is safe and secure. We just did a statewide emergency exercise with law enforcement and election workers across Connecticut. 147 towns participated.
Really?
And I'll just paraphrase what the Deputy Director of Emergency Services and Personal Protection said at the end. She said, I actually feel a lot better than I did going into this because I did not realize how many checks and balances are already in place to help our registrars and town clerks deal and keep our elections safe and secure. So I would leave you with that.
Yeah.
And please go out and vote.
Go out and vote. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Go out and vote. And you can early vote, too.
Yeah, for the first time ever in Connecticut, weekend, Saturday, Sunday, some evenings, please go out and vote.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. Well, Madam Secretary, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we really hope that you'll join us again.
Anytime.
This is great.
Great.
Nice.
Thank you. You too.
Yes, thank you so much.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.